Peter Bull. There once lived in Denmark a peasant and his wife who owned a very good farm but had no children. They often lamented to each other that they had no one of their own to inherit all the wealth that they possessed. They continued to prosper and became rich people, but there was no heir to it all. One year it happened that they owned a pretty little bull calf, which they called Peter. It was the prettiest little creature they had ever seen. So beautiful and so wise that it understood everything that was said to it, and so gentle and so full of play that both the man and his wife came to be as fond of it as if it had been their own child. One day the man said to his wife, "I wonder now whether our parish clerk could teach Peter to talk. In that case we could not do better than adopt him as our son and let him inherit all that we possess." "Well, I don't know," said his wife. "Our clerk is tremendously learned, and knows much more than his paternoster, and I could almost believe that he might be able to teach Peter to talk, for Peter has a wonderfully good head too. You might at least ask him about it." Off went the man to the clerk, and asked him whether he thought he could teach a bull calf that they had to speak, for they wished so much to have it as their heir. The clerk was no fool. He looked round about to see that no one could overhear them, and said, "Oh, yes, I can easily do that, but you must not speak to anyone about it. It must be done in all secrecy, and the priest must not know of it, otherwise I shall get into trouble, as it is forbidden. It will also cost you something, as some very expensive books are required." "That did not matter at all," the man said. "They would not care so very much what it cost." The clerk could have $100 to begin with to buy the books. He also promised to tell no one about it and to bring the calf round in the evening. He gave the clerk the $100 on the spot, and in the evening took the calf round to him, and the clerk promised to do his best with it. In a week's time he came back to the clerk to hear about the calf and see how it was thriving. The clerk, however, said that he could not get a sight of it, for then Peter would long after him and forget all that he had already learned. He was getting on well with his learning, but another $100 were needed, as they must have more books. The peasant had the money with him, so he gave it to the clerk and went home again with high hopes. In another week the man came again to learn what progress Peter had made now. "He is getting on very well," said the clerk. "I suppose he can't say anything yet," said the man. "Oh, yes," said the clerk. "He can say moo now." "Do you think he will get on with his learning?" asked the peasant. "Oh, yes," said the clerk, "but I shall want another $100 for books. Peter can't learn well out of the ones that he has got." "Well, well," said the man, "what must be spent shall be spent." So he gave the clerk the third $100 for books, and a cask of good old ale for Peter. The clerk drank the ale himself, and gave the calf milk, which he thought would be better for it. Some weeks passed, during which the peasant did not come round to ask after the calf, being frightened lest it should cost him another $100, for he had begun to squirm a bit at having to part with so much money. Meanwhile, the clerk decided that the calf was as fat as it could be, so he killed it. After he had got all the beef out of the way, he went inside, put on his black clothes, and made his way to the peasant's house. As soon as he had said, "Good day," he asked, "Has Peter come home here?" "No, indeed he hasn't," said the man. "Surely he hasn't run away?" "I hope," said the clerk, "that he would not behave so contemptibly after all the trouble I have had to teach him, and all that I have spent upon him. I have had to spend at least $100 of my own money to buy books for him before I got him so far on. He could say anything he liked now, so he said today that he longed to see his parents again. I was willing to give him that pleasure, But I was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find the way here by himself, so I made myself ready to go with him. When we had got outside the house, I remembered that I had left my stick inside, and went in again to get it. When I came out again, Peter had gone off on his own account. I thought he would be here, and if he isn't, I don't know where he is." The peasant and his wife began to lament bitterly that Peter had run away in this fashion just when they were to have so much joy of him, and after they had spent so much on his education. The worst of it was that now they had no heir, after all. The clerk comforted them as best he could. He also was greatly distressed that Peter should have behaved in such a way just when he should have gained honour from his pupil. Perhaps he had only gone astray, and he would advertise him at church next Sunday and find out where anyone had seen him. Then he bade them good-bye and went home. Nad dined on a good fat veal roast. Now it so happened that the clerk took in a newspaper, and one day he chanced to read in its columns of a new merchant who had settled in a town at some distance, and whose name was Peter Bull. He put the newspaper in his pocket and went round to the sorrowing couple who had lost their heir. He read the paragraph to them and added, "I wonder now whether that could be your bull calf, Peter?" "Yes, of course it is," said the man. "Who else would it be?" His wife then spoke up and said, "You must set out, good man, and see about him, for it is him, I am perfectly certain. Take a good sum of money with you too, for who knows but what he may want some cash now that he has turned a merchant." Next day the man got a bag of money on his back and a sandwich in his pocket, and his pipe in his mouth, and set out for the town where the new merchant lived. It was no short way, and he travelled for many days before he finally arrived there. He reached it one morning just at daybreak, found out the right place, and asked if the merchant was at home. "Yes, he was," said the people, "but he was not up yet." "That doesn't matter," said the peasant, "for I am his father. Just show me up to his bedroom." He was shown up to the room, and as soon as he entered it, had caught sight of the merchant, he recognized him at once. He had the same broad forehead, the same thick neck, and same red hair, but in other respects he was now like a human being. The peasant rushed straight up to him and took a firm hold of him. "Oh, Peter," said he, "what a sorrow you have caused us, both myself and your mother, by running off like this, just as we had got you well educated. Get up now, so that I can see you properly, and have a talk with you." The merchant thought that it was a lunatic who had made his way into him, and thought it best to take things quietly. "All right," said he, "I shall do so at once." He got out of bed and made haste to dress himself. "Aye," said the peasant, "now I can see how clever our clerk is. He has done well by you, for now you look just like a human being. If one didn't know it, one would never think that it was you we got from the Red Cow. Will you come home with me now?" "No," said the merchant, "I can't find time just now. I have a big business to look after." "You could have the farm at once, you know," said the peasant, "and we old people would retire. But if you would rather stay in business, of course you may do so. Are you in want of anything?" "Oh, yes," said the merchant. "I want nothing so much as money. A merchant has always a use for that." "I can well believe that," said the peasant, "for you had nothing at all to start with. I have brought some with me for that very end." With that, he emptied his bag of money out upon the table, so that it was all covered with bright dollars. When the merchant saw what kind of man he had before him, he began to speak him fair, and invited him to stay with him for some days, so that they might have some more talk together. "Very well," said the peasant, "but you must call me father." "I have neither father nor mother alive," said Peter Bull. "I know that," said the man. "Your real father was sold at Hamburg last Michaelmas, and your real mother died while carving in spring. But my wife and I have adopted you as our own, and you are our only heir, so you must call me Father." Peter Bull was quite willing to do so, and it was settled that he should keep the money, while the peasant made his will and left to him all that he had, before he went home to his wife, and told her the whole story. She was delighted to hear that it was true enough about Peter Bull, that he was no other than their own bull calf. "You must go at once and tell the clerk," said she, "and pay him the $100 of his own money that he spent upon our son. He has earned them well, and more besides, for all the joy he has given us in having such a son and heir." The man agreed with this, and thanked the clerk for all he had done, and gave him $200. Then he sold the farm, and removed with his wife to the town where their dear son and heir was living. To him they gave all their wealth, and lived with him till their dying day. Princess Minette. Once upon a time there lived a young king whose name was Sushi, and he had been brought up, ever since he was a baby, by the fairy Inconstancy. Now the fairy Girouette had a kind heart, but she was a very trying person to live with, for she never knew her own mind for 2 minutes together. And as she was the sole ruler at court till the prince grew up, everything was always at 6s and 7s. At first she determined to follow the old custom of keeping the young king ignorant of the duties he would have to perform some day. Then, quite suddenly, she resigned the reins of government into his hands, but unluckily it was too late to train him properly for the post. However, the fairy did not think of that, but, carried away by her new ideas, she hastily formed a council and named as Prime Minister the excellent Ditto, so called because he had never been known to contradict anybody. Young Prince Sushi had a handsome face, and at the bottom a good deal of common sense, but he had never been taught good manners, and was shy and awkward, and had, besides, never learned how to use his brains. Under these circumstances, it is not surprising that the council did not get through much work. Indeed, the affairs of the country fell into such disorder that at last the people broke out into open rebellion, and it was only the courage of the king, who continued to play the flute while swords and spears were flashing before the palace gate, that prevented civil war from being declared. No sooner was the revolt put down than the council turned their attention to the question of the young king's marriage. Various princesses were proposed to him, and the fairy, who was anxious to get the affair over before she left the court forever, gave it as her opinion that the Princess Diaphana would make the most suitable wife. Accordingly, envoys were sent to bring back an exact report of the princess's looks and ways, and they returned saying that she was tall and well made, but so very light that the equerries who accompanied her in her walks had to be always watching her, lest she should suddenly be blown away. This had happened so often that her subjects lived in terror of losing her altogether, and tried everything they could think of to keep her to the ground. They even suggested that she should carry weights in her pockets or have them tied to her ankles. But this idea was given up, as the princess found it so uncomfortable. At length it was decided that she was never to go out in a wind, and in order to make matters surer still, the equerries each held the end of a string which was fastened to her waist. The council talked over this report for some days, and then the king made up his mind that he would judge for himself and pretend to be his own ambassador. This plan was by no means new, but it had often succeeded, and, anyhow, they could think of nothing better. Such a splendid embassy had never before been seen in any country. The kingdom was left in the charge of the Prime Minister, who answered ditto to everything. But the choice was better than it seemed, for the worthy man was much beloved by the people, as he agreed with all they said. and they left him feeling very pleased with themselves and their own wisdom. When the king arrived at Diaphanos' court, he found a magnificent reception awaiting him, for though they pretended not to know who he was, secrets like this are never hidden. Now, the young king had a great dislike to long ceremonies, so he proposed that his second interview with the princess should take place in the garden. The princess made some difficulties, but as the weather was lovely and very still, she at last consented to the king's wishes. But no sooner had they finished their first bows and curtsies than a slight breeze sprung up and began to sway the princess, whose equerries had retired out of respect. The king went forward to steady her, but the wind that he caused only drove her further away from him. He rushed after her, exclaiming, "Oh, princess! Are you really running away from me?" "Good gracious, no," she replied. "Run a little quicker, and you will be able to stop me, and I shall be forever grateful." "That is what comes of talking in a garden," she added in disgust, "as if one wasn't much better in a room that was tightly closed all round." The king ran as fast as he could, but the wind ran faster still, and in a moment the princess was whirled to the bottom of the garden, which was bounded by a ditch. She cleared it like a bird, and the king, who was obliged to stop short at the edge, saw the lovely Diaphana flying over the plain, sometimes driven to the right, sometimes to the left, till at last she vanished out of sight. By this time the whole court were running over the plain, some on foot and some on horseback, all hurrying to the help of their princess, who really was in some danger, for the wind was rising to the force of a gale. The king looked on for a little, and then returned with his attendants to the palace, reflecting all the while on the extreme lightness of his proposed bride, and the absurdity of having a wife that rose in the air better than any kite. He thought on the whole that it would be wiser not to wait longer, but to depart at once, and he started on horseback at the very moment when the princess had been found by her followers wet to the skin and blown against a rick. Susi met the carriage which was bringing her home, and stopped to congratulate her on her escape, and to advise her to put on dry clothes. Then he continued his journey. It took a good while for the king to get home again, and he was rather cross at having had so much trouble for nothing. Besides which, his courtiers made fun at his adventure, and he did not like being laughed at, though of course they did not dare to do it before his face. And the end of it was that very soon he started on his travels again, only allowing one equerry to accompany him, and even this attendant he managed to lose the moment he had left his own kingdom behind him. Now it was the custom in those days for princes and princesses to be brought up by fairies, who loved them as their own children, and did not mind what inconvenience they put other people to for their sakes, for all the world as if they had been real mothers. The fairy Aveline, who lived in a country that touched at one point the kingdom of King Susi, had under her care the lovely Princess Minon. Minette had made up her mind to marry her to the young king, who, in spite of his awkward manners, which could be improved, was really very much nicer than most of the young men she was likely to meet. So Aveline made her preparations accordingly, and began by arranging that the equerry should lose himself in the forest, after which she took away the king's sword and his horse while he lay asleep under a tree. Her reason for this was that she felt persuaded that, finding himself suddenly alone and robbed of everything, the king would hide his real birth, and would have to fall back on his powers of pleasing, like other men, which would be much better for him. When the king awoke and found that the tree to which he had tied his horse had its lowest branch broken, and that nothing living was in sight, he was much dismayed, and sought high and low for his lost treasure, but all in vain. After a time he began to get hungry, so he decided that he had better try to find his way out of the forest, and perhaps he might have a chance of getting something to eat. He had only gone a few steps when he met Aveline, who had taken the shape of an old woman with a heavy bundle of faggots on her back. She staggered along the path and almost fell at his feet, and Sucy, afraid that she might have hurt herself, picked her up and set her on her feet again before passing on his way. But he was not to be let off so easy. "What about my bundle?" cried the old woman. "Where is your politeness? Really, you seem to have been very nicely brought up. What have they taught you?" "Taught me? Nothing," replied he. "I can well believe it," she said. "You don't know even how to pick up a bundle." "Oh, you can come near. I am cleverer than you, and know how to pick up a bundle very well." The king blushed at her words, which he felt had a great deal of truth in them, and took up the bundle meekly. Aveline, delighted at the success of her first experiment, hobbled along after him, chattering all the while, as old women do. "I wish," she said, "that all kings had done as much once in their lives. Then they would know what a lot of trouble it takes to get wood for their fires." Sucy felt this to be true, and was sorry for the old woman. "Where are we going to?" asked he. "To the castle of the White Demon, and if you are in want of work, I will find you something to do." "But I can't do anything," he said, "except carry a bundle, and I shan't earn much by that." "Oh, you are learning," replied the old woman, "and it isn't bad for a first lesson." But the king was paying very little attention to her, for he was rather cross and very tired. Indeed, he felt that he really could not carry the bundle any further, and was about to lay it down, when up came a young maiden more beautiful than the day, and covered with precious stones. She ran to them, exclaiming to the old woman, "Oh, you poor thing! I was just coming after you to see if I could help you." "Here is a young man," replied the old woman, "who will be quite ready to give you up the bundle. You see, he does not look as if he enjoyed carrying it." "Will you let me take it, sir?" she asked. But the king felt ashamed of himself, and held on to it tightly, while the presence of the princess put him in a better temper. So they all travelled together till they arrived at a very ordinary-looking house, which Aveline pointed out as the castle of the White Demon, and told the king that he might put down his bundle in the courtyard. The young man was terribly afraid of being recognized by someone in this strange position, and would have turned on his heel and gone away had it not been for the thought of Minette. Still, he felt very awkward and lonely, for both the princess and the old woman had entered the castle without taking the slightest notice of the young man, who remained where he was for some time, not quite knowing what he had better do. At length a servant arrived and led him up into a beautiful room filled with people, who were either playing on musical instruments or talking in a lively manner, which astonished the king, who stood silently listening and not at all pleased at the want of attention paid him. Matters went on this way for some time. Every day the king fell more and more in love with Minette, and every day the princess seemed more and more taken up with other people. At last, in despair, the prince sought out the old woman to try to get some advice from her as to his conduct, or, anyway, to have the pleasure of talking about Minette. He found her spinning in an underground chamber, but quite ready to tell him all he wanted to know. In answer to his questions, he learned that in order to win the hand of the princess, it was not enough to be born a prince, for she would marry nobody who had not proved himself faithful, and had, besides, all those talents and accomplishments which help to make people happy. For a moment, Sucy was very much cast down on hearing this, but then he plucked up. "Tell me what I must do in order to win the heart of the princess, and no matter how hard it is, I will do it. And show me how I can repay you for your kindness, and you shall have anything I can give you. Shall I bring in your bundle of faggots every day?" "It is enough that you should have made the offer," replied the old woman, and she added, holding out a skein of thread, "Take this. One day you will be thankful for it, and when it becomes useless, your difficulties will be past." "Is it the skein of my life?" he asked. "It is the skein of your love's ill luck," she said, and he took it and went away. Now the fairy Girouette, who had brought up Sushi, had an old friend called Grimace, the protectress of Prince Fluet. Grimace often talked over the young prince's affairs with Girouette, and, when she decided that he was old enough to govern his own kingdom, consulted Girouette as to a suitable wife. Girouette, who never stopped to think or to make inquiries, drew such a delightful picture of Minon Minette that Grimace determined to spare no pains to bring about the marriage, and accordingly Fluet was presented at court. But though the young man was pleasant and handsome, the princess thought him rather womanish in some ways, and displayed her opinion so openly as to draw upon herself and Aveline the anger of the fairy, who declared that Minon Minette should never know happiness till she had found a bridge without an arch and a bird without feathers. So saying, she also went away. Before the king set out afresh on his travels, Aveline had restored to him his horse and his sword, and though these were but small consolation for the absence of the princess, they were better than nothing, for he felt that somehow they might be the means of leading him back to her. After crossing several deserts, the king arrived at length in a country that seemed inhabited, but the instant he stepped over the border, he was seized and flung into chains, and dragged at once to the capital. He asked his guards why he was treated like this, but the only answer he got was that he was in the territory of the Iron King, for in those days countries had no names of their own, but were called after their rulers. The young man was led into the presence of the Iron King, who was seated on a black throne in a hall also hung with black, as a token of mourning for all the relations whom he had put to death. "What are you doing in my country?" he cried fiercely. "I came here by accident," replied Susi, "and if I ever escape from your clutches, I will take warning by you and treat my subjects differently." "Do you dare to insult me in my own court?" cried the king. "Away with him to Little Ease." Now, Little Ease was an iron cage hung by 4 thick chains in the middle of a great vaulted hall, and the prisoner inside could neither sit, nor stand, nor lie. And, besides that, he was made to suffer by turns unbearable heat and cold, while 100 heavy bolts kept everything safe. Girouette, whose business it was to see after Sushi, had forgotten his existence in the excitement of some new idea, and he would not have been alive long to trouble anybody if Aveline had not come to the rescue and whispered in his ear, "And the skein of thread." He took it up obediently, though he did not see how it would help him. But he tied it round one of the iron bars of his cage, which seemed the only thing he could do, and gave a pull. To his surprise, the bar gave way at once, and he found he could break it into 1,000 pieces. After this, it did not take him long to get out of his cage, or to treat the closely barred windows of the hall in the same manner. But even after he had done all this, freedom appeared as far from him as ever, for between him and the open country was a high wall, and so smooth that not even a monkey could climb it. Then Sushi's heart died within him. He saw nothing for it but to submit to some horrible death, but he determined that the Iron King should not profit more than he could help, and flung his precious thread into the air, saying, as he did so, "O fairy, my misfortunes are greater than your power. I am grateful for your goodwill, but take back your gift." The fairy had pity on his youth and want of faith, and took care that one end of the thread remained in his hand. He suddenly felt a jerk, and saw that the thread must have caught on something, and this thought filled him with the daring that is born of despair. "Better," he said to himself, "trust to a thread than to the mercies of a king. And, gliding down, he found himself safe on the other side of the wall. Then he rolled up the thread and put it carefully into his pocket, breathing silent thanks to the fairy. Now, Minon? Minette had been kept informed by Aveline of the prince's adventures, and when she heard of the way in which he had been treated by the Iron King, she became furious and began to prepare for war. She made her plans with all the secrecy she could, but when great armies are collected, people are apt to suspect a storm is brewing. And of course, it is very difficult to keep anything hidden from fairy godmothers. Anyway, Grimace soon heard of it, and as she had never forgiven Minette for refusing Prince Fluet, she felt that here was her chance of revenge. Up to this time, Aveline had been able to put a stop to many of Grimace's spiteful tricks, and to keep guard over Minette. But she had no power over anything that happened at a distance, and when the princess declared her intention of putting herself at the head of her army, and began to train herself to bear fatigue by hunting daily, the fairy entreated her to be careful never to cross the borders of her dominions without Aveline to protect her. The princess at once gave her promise, and all went well for some days. Unluckily, one morning, as Minette was cantering slowly on her beautiful white horse, thinking a great deal about Sushi, and not at all of the boundaries of her kingdom, of which, indeed, she was very ignorant, she suddenly found herself in front of a house made entirely of dead leaves, which somehow brought all sorts of unpleasant things into her head. She remembered Aveline's warning, and tried to turn her horse, but it stood as still as if it had been marble. Then the princess felt that she was slowly, and against her will, being dragged to the ground. She shrieked and clung tightly to the saddle, but it was all in vain. She longed to fly, but something outside herself proved too strong for her, and she was forced to take the path that led to the house of dead leaves. Scarcely had her feet touched the threshold than Grimace appeared. "So here you are at last, Minette. I have been watching for you a long time, and my trap was ready for you from the beginning. Come here, my darling. I will teach you to make war on my friends. Things won't turn out exactly as you fancied. What you have got to do now is to go on your knees to the king and crave his pardon. And before he consents to a peace, you will have to implore him to grant you the favor of becoming his wife. Meanwhile, you will have to be my servant." From that day, the poor princess was put to the hardest and dirtiest work, and each morning something more disagreeable seemed to await her, besides which she had no food but a little black bread, and no bed but a little straw. Out of pure spite, she was sent in the heat of the day to look after the geese, and would most likely have got a sunstroke if she had not happened to pick up in the fields a large fan, with which she sheltered her face. To be sure, a fan seems rather an odd possession for a goose girl, but the princess did not think of that, and she forgot all her troubles when, on opening the fan to use it as a parasol, out tumbled a letter from her lover. Then she felt sure that the fairy had not forgotten her, and took heart. When Grimace saw that Minette still managed to look as white as snow, instead of being burnt as brown as a berry, she wondered what could have happened, and began to watch her closely. The following day, when the sun was at its highest and hottest, she noticed her draw a fan from the folds of her dress and hold it before her eyes. The fairy, in a rage, tried to snatch it from her, but the princess would not let it go. "Give me that fan at once!" cried Grimace. "Never while I live," answered the princess, and, not knowing where it would be safest, placed it under her feet. In an instant she felt herself rising from the ground, with the fan always beneath her, and while Grimace was too much blinded by her fury to notice what was going on, the princess was quickly soaring out of her reach. All this time, Sushi had been wandering through the world with his precious thread carefully fastened round him, seeking every possible and impossible place where his beloved princess might chance to be. But though he sometimes found traces of her, or even messages scratched on a rock or cut in the bark of a tree, she herself was nowhere to be found. "If she is not on the earth," said Susi to himself, "perhaps she is hiding somewhere in the air. It is there that I shall find her." So, by the help of his thread, he tried to mount upwards, but he could go such a little way and hurt himself dreadfully when he tumbled back to earth again. Still, he did not give up, and after many days of efforts and tumbles, he found to his great joy that he could go a little higher and stay up a little longer than he had done at first, and by he was able to live in the air altogether. But alas, the world of the air seemed as empty of her as the world below, and Susi was beginning to despair, and to think that he must go and search the world that lay in the sea. He was floating sadly along, not paying any heed to where he was going, when he saw in the distance a beautiful, bright sort of bird coming towards him. His heart beat fast. He did not know why, and as they both drew near, the voice of the princess exclaimed, "Behold the bird without feathers, and the bridge without an arch." So their first meeting took place in the air, but it was none the less happy for that, and the fan grew big enough to hold the king as well as Aveline, who had hastened to give them some good advice. She guided the fan above the spot where the two armies lay encamped before each other, ready to give battle. The fight was long and bloody, but in the end, the Iron King was obliged to give way and surrender to the princess, who set him to keep King Susi's sheep, first making him swear a solemn oath that he would treat them kindly. Then the marriage took place in the presence of Girouette, whom they had the greatest trouble to find, and who was much astonished to discover how much business had been got through in her absence. Snowflake. Once upon a time there lived a peasant called Ivan, and he had a wife whose name was Marie. They would have been quite happy, except for one thing: they had no children to play with, and as they were now old people, they did not find that watching the children of their neighbors at all made up to them for having one of their own. One winter, which nobody living will ever forget, the snow lay so deep that it came up to the knees of even the tallest man. When it had all fallen, and the sun was shining again, the children ran out into the street to play, and the old man and his wife sat at their window and gazed at them. The children first made a sort of little terrace and stamped it hard and firm, and then they began to make a snow woman. Ivan and Marie watched them, the while thinking about many things. Suddenly Ivan's face brightened, and looking at his wife, he said, "Wife, why shouldn't we make a snow woman too?" "Why not?" replied Marie, who happened to be in a very good temper. "It might amuse us a little. But there is no use making a woman. Let us make a little snow child, and pretend it is a living one." "Yes, let us do that," said Ivan, and he took down his cap and went into the garden with his old wife. Then the two set to work with all their might to make a doll out of the snow. They shaped a little body, and 2 little hands, and 2 little feet. On top of all, they placed a ball of snow, out of which the head was to be. "What in the world are you doing?" asked a passer-by. "Can't you guess?" returned Ivan. "Making a snow child," replied Marie. They had finished the nose and the chin. 2 holes were left for the eyes, and Ivan carefully shaped out the mouth. No sooner had he done so than he felt a warm breath upon his cheek. He started back in surprise and looked, and behold! The eyes of the child met his, and its lips, which were as red as raspberries, smiled at him. "What is it?" cried Ivan, crossing himself. "Am I mad? Or is the thing bewitched? The snow child bent its head as if it had been really alive. It moved its little arms and its little legs in the snow that lay about it, just as the living children did theirs. "Ah, Ivan, Ivan!" exclaimed Marie, trembling with joy. "Heaven has sent us a child at last." And she threw herself upon Snowflake, for that was the snow child's name, and covered her with kisses. And the loose snow fell away from Snowflake as an eggshell does from an egg, and it was a little girl whom Marie held in her arms. "Oh, my darling Snowflake!" cried the old woman, and led her into the cottage. And Snowflake grew fast. Each hour as well as each day made a difference, and every day she became more and more beautiful. The old couple hardly knew how to contain themselves for joy, and thought of nothing else. The cottage was always full of village children, for they amused Snowflake, and there was nothing in the world they would not have done to amuse her. She was their doll, and they were continually inventing new dresses for her, and teaching her songs or playing with her. Nobody knew how clever she was. She noticed everything, and could learn a lesson in a moment. Anyone would have taken her for 13 at least. And, besides all that, she was so good and obedient, and so pretty too. Her skin was as white as snow, her eyes as blue as forget-me-nots, and her hair was long and golden. Only her cheeks had no colour in them, but were as fair as her forehead. So the winter went on, till at last the spring sun mounted higher in the heavens and began to warm the earth. The grass grew green in the fields, and high in the air the larks were heard singing. The village girls met and danced in a ring, singing, "Beautiful spring, how came you here? How came you here? Did you come on a plough, or was it a harrow?" Only Snowflake sat quite still by the window of the cottage. "What is the matter, dear child?" asked Marie. "Why are you so sad? Are you ill, or have they treated you unkindly?" "No," replied Snowflake, "it is nothing, mother. No one has hurt me. I am well." The spring sun had chased away the last snow from its hiding place under the hedges. The fields were full of flowers. Nightingales sang in the trees, and all the world was gay. But the gayer grew, the birds and the flowers the sadder became. Snowflake. She hid herself from her playmates, and curled herself up where the shadows were deepest, like a lily amongst its leaves. Her only pleasure was to lie amid the green willows near some sparkling stream. At the dawn, and at twilight only, she seemed happy. When a great storm broke, and the earth was white with hail, she became bright and joyous as the snowflake of old. But when the clouds passed, and the hail melted beneath the sun, Snowflake would burst into tears and weep as a sister would weep over her brother. The spring passed, and it was the eve of St. John, or Midsummer Day. This was the greatest holiday of the year, when the young girls met in the woods to dance and play. They went to fetch Snowflake and said to Marie, "Let her come and dance with us." But Marie was afraid. She could not tell why. Only she could not bear the child to go. Snowflake did not wish to go either, but they had no excuse ready. So Marie kissed the girl and said, "Go, my Snowflake, and be happy with your friends, and you, dear children, be careful of her. You know she is the light of my eyes to me." "Oh, we will take care of her," cried the girls gaily, and they ran off to the woods. There they wore wreaths, gathered nosegays, and sang songs, some sad, some merry. And whatever they did, Snowflake did too. When the sun set, they lit a fire of dry grass and placed themselves in a row, Snowflake being the last of all. "Now, watch us," they said, "and run just as we do." And they all began to sing and to jump one after another across the fire. Suddenly, close behind them, they heard a sigh, then a groan. They turned hastily and looked at each other. There was nothing. They looked again. Where was Snowflake? She has hidden herself for fun, they thought, and searched for her everywhere. Snowflake! Snowflake! But there was no answer. Where can she be? Oh, she must have gone home. They returned to the village, but there was no Snowflake. For days after that they sought her high and low. They examined every bush and every hedge, but there was no Snowflake. And long after everyone else had given up hope, Ivan and Marie would wander through the woods crying, "Snowflake, my dove, come back, come back." And sometimes they thought they heard a call, but it was never the voice of Snowflake. And what had become of her? Had a fierce wild beast seized her and dragged her into his lair in the forest? Had some bird carried her off across the wide blue sea? No, no beast had touched her, no bird had borne her away. With the first breath of flame that swept over her when she ran with her friends, Snowflake had melted away, and a little soft haze floating upwards was all that remained of her, the bird grip. It happened once that a king, who had a great kingdom and 3 sons, became blind, and no human skill or art could restore to him his sight. At last there came to the palace an old woman, who told him that in the whole world there was only one thing that could give him back his sight, and that was to get the bird grip. His song would open the king's eyes. When the king's eldest son heard this, he offered to bring the bird grip, which was kept in a cage by a king in another country and carefully guarded as his greatest treasure. The blind king was greatly rejoiced at his son's resolve, fitted him out in the best way he could, and let him go. When the prince had ridden some distance, he came to an inn in which there were many guests, all of whom were merry and drank and sang and played at dice. This joyous life pleased the prince so well that he stayed in the inn, took part in the playing and drinking, and forgot both his blind father and the bird grip. Meanwhile the king waited with both hope and anxiety for his son's return. But as time went on and nothing was heard of him, the second prince asked leave to go in search of his brother as well as to bring the bird grip. The king granted his request and fitted him out in the finest fashion. But when the prince came to the inn and found his brother among his merry companions, he also remained there and forgot both the bird grip and his blind father. When the king noticed that neither of his sons returned, although a long time had passed since the second one set out, he was greatly distressed, for not only had he lost all hope of getting back his sight, but he had also lost his 2 eldest sons. The youngest now came to him and offered to go in search of his brothers and to bring the bird grip. He was quite certain that he would succeed in this. The king was unwilling to risk his 3rd son on such an errand, but he begged so long that his father had at last to consent. This prince also was fitted out in the finest manner like his brothers, and so rode away. He also turned into the same inn as his brothers, and when these saw him, they assailed him with many entreaties to remain with them and share their merry life. But he answered that now, when he had found them, his next task was to get the bird grip, for which his blind father was longing, and so he had not a single hour to spare with them in the inn. He then said farewell to his brothers, and rode on to find another inn in which to pass the night. When he had ridden a long way, and it began to grow dark, he came to a house which lay deep in the forest. Here he was received in a very friendly manner by the host, who put his horse into the stable, and led the prince himself into the guest chamber, where he ordered a maid-servant to lay the cloth and set down the supper. It was now dark, and while the girl was laying the cloth and setting down the dishes, and the prince had begun to appease his hunger, he heard the most piteous shrieks and cries from the next room. He sprang up from the table and asked the girl what those cries were, and whether he had fallen into a den of robbers. The girl answered that these shrieks were heard every night, but it was no living being who uttered them. It was a dead man, whose life the host had taken because he could not pay for the meals he had had in the inn. The host further refused to bury the dead man, as he had left nothing to pay the expenses of the funeral, and every night he went and scourged the dead body of his victim. When she had said this, she lifted the cover off one of the dishes, and the prince saw that there lay on it a knife and an axe. He understood then that the host meant to ask him by this what kind of death he preferred to die, unless he was willing to ransom his life with his money. He then summoned the host, gave him a large sum for his own life, and paid the dead man's debt as well, besides paying him for burying the body, which the murderer now promised to attend to. The prince, however, felt that his life was not safe in this murderer's den, and asked the maid to help him to escape that night. She replied that the attempt to do so might cost her her own life, as the key of the stable in which the prince's horse stood lay under the host's pillow. But, as she herself was a prisoner there, she would help him to escape if he would take her along with him. He promised to do so, and they succeeded in getting away from the inn, and rode on until they came to another far away from it, where the prince got a good place for the girl before proceeding on his journey. As he now rode all alone through a forest, there met him a fox, who greeted him in a friendly fashion and asked him where he was going, and on what errand he was bent. The prince answered that his errand was too important to be confided to everyone that he met. "You are right in that," said the fox, "for it relates to the bird Grip, which you want to take and bring home to your blind father. I could help you in this, but in that case you must follow my counsel." The prince thought that this was a good offer, especially as the fox was ready to go with him and show him the way to the castle, where the bird Grip sat in his cage. And so he promised to obey the fox's instructions. When they had traversed the forest together, they saw the castle at some distance. Then the fox gave the prince 3 grains of gold, one of which he was to throw into the guardroom, another into the room where the bird Grip sat, and the third into its cage. He could then take the bird, but he must beware of stroking it, otherwise it would go ill with him. The prince took the grains of gold and promised to follow the fox's directions faithfully. When he came to the guardroom of the castle, he threw one of the grains in there, and the guards at once fell asleep. The same thing happened with those who kept watch in the room beside the bird Grip, and when he threw the 3rd grain into its cage, the bird also fell asleep. When the prince got the beautiful bird into his hand, he could not resist the temptation to stroke it, whereupon it awoke and began to scream. At this the whole castle woke up, and the prince was taken prisoner. As he now sat in his prison and bitterly lamented that his own disobedience had brought himself into trouble, and deprived his father of the chance of recovering his sight, the fox suddenly stood in front of him. The prince was very pleased to see it again, and received with great meekness all its reproaches, as well as promised to be more obedient in the future, if the fox would only help him out of his fix. The fox said that he had come to assist him, but he could do no more than advise the prince, when he was brought up for trial, to answer yes to all the judge's questions, and everything would go well. The prince faithfully followed his instructions, so that when the judge asked him whether he had meant to steal the bird Grip, he said yes, and when the judge asked him if he was a master thief, he again answered yes. When the king heard that he admitted being a master thief, he said that he would forgive him the attempt to steal the bird if he would go to the next kingdom and carry off the world's most beautiful princess, and bring her to him. To this also the prince said yes. When he left the castle, he met the fox, who went along with him to the next kingdom, and when they came near the castle there, gave him 3 grains of gold, one to throw into the guardroom, another into the princess's chamber, and the third into her bed. At the same time, he strictly warned him not to kiss the princess. The prince went into the castle, and did with the grains of gold as the fox had told him, so that sleep fell upon everyone there. But when he had taken the princess into his arms, he forgot the fox's warning at the sight of her beauty, and kissed her. Then both she and all the others in the castle woke. The prince was taken prisoner, and put into a strong dungeon. Here the fox again came to him, and reproached him with his disobedience, but promised to help him out of this trouble, also if he would answer yes to everything they asked him at his trial. The prince willingly agreed to this, and admitted to the judge that he had meant to steal the princess, and that he was a master thief. When the king learned this, he said he would forgive his offense if he would go to the next kingdom and steal the horse with the 4 golden shoes. To this also the prince said yes. When he had gone a little way from the castle, he met the fox, and they continued on their journey together. When they reached the end of it, the prince for the 3rd time received 3 grains of gold from the fox, with directions to throw one into the guard chamber, another into the stable, and the 3rd into the horse's stall. But the fox told him that above the horse's stall hung a beautiful golden saddle, which he must not touch, if he did not want to bring himself into new troubles worse than those he had escaped from, for then the fox could help him no longer. The prince promised to be firm this time. He threw the grains of gold in the proper places and untied the horse, but with that he caught sight of the golden saddle, and thought that none but it could suit so beautiful a horse, especially as it had golden shoes. But just as he stretched out his hand to take it, he received from some invisible being so hard a blow on the arm that it was made quite numb. This recalled to him his promise and his danger, so he led out the horse without looking at the golden saddle again. The fox was waiting for him outside the castle, and the prince confessed to him that he had very nearly given way to temptation this time as well. "I know that," said the fox, "for it was I who struck you over the arm." As they now went on together, the prince said that he could not forget the beautiful princess, and asked the fox whether he did not think that she ought to ride home to his father's palace on this horse with the golden shoes. The fox agreed that this would be excellent, if the prince would now go and carry her off. He would give him 3 grains of gold for that purpose. The prince was quite ready, and promised to keep better command of himself this time, and not kiss her. He got the grains of gold and entered the castle, where he carried off the princess, set her on the beautiful horse, and held on his way. When they came near to the castle where the bird Grip sat in his cage, he again asked the fox for 3 grains of gold. These he got, and with them he was successful in carrying off the bird. He was now full of joy, for his blind father would now recover his sight, while he himself owned the world's most beautiful princess and the horse with the golden shoes. The prince and princess travelled on together with mirth and happiness, and the fox followed them until they came to the forest, where the prince first met with him. "Here our ways part," said the fox. "You have now got all that your heart desired, and you will have a prosperous journey to your father's palace if only you do not ransom anyone's life with money." The prince thanked the fox for all his help, promised to give heed to his warning, said farewell to him, and rode on, with the princess by his side and the bird Grip on his wrist. They soon arrived at the inn where the 2 eldest brothers had stayed, forgetting their errand. But now no merry song or noise of mirth was heard from it. When the prince came nearer, he saw 2 gallows erected, and when he entered the inn along with the princess, he saw that all the rooms were hung with black, and that everything inside foreboded sorrow and death. He asked the reason of this, and was told that 2 princes were to be hanged that day for debt. They had spent all their money in feasting and playing, and were now deeply in debt to the host. And as no one could be found to ransom their lives, they were about to be hanged according to the law. The prince knew that it was his 2 brothers who had thus forfeited their lives, and it cut him to the heart to think that 2 princes should suffer such a shameful death. And, as he had sufficient money with him, he paid their debts and so ransomed their lives. At first the brothers were grateful for their liberty, but when they saw the youngest brother's treasures, they became jealous of his good fortune and planned how to bring him to destruction, and then take the bird Grip, the princess, and the horse with the golden shoes, and convey them to their blind father. After they had agreed on how to carry out their treachery, they enticed the prince to a den of lions and threw him down among them. Then they set the princess on horseback, took the bird Grip, and rode homeward. The princess wept bitterly, but they told her that it would cost her her life if she did not say that the 2 brothers had won all the treasures. When they arrived at their father's palace, there was great rejoicing, and everyone praised the 2 princes for their courage and bravery. When the king inquired after the youngest brother, they answered that he had led such a life in the inn that he had been hanged for debt. The king sorrowed bitterly over this, because the youngest prince was his dearest son, and the joy over the treasures soon died away. For the bird Grip would not sing so that the king might recover his sight. The princess wept night and day, and no one dared to venture so close to the horse as to have a look at his golden shoes. Now, when the youngest prince was thrown down into the lion's den, he found the fox sitting there. And the lions, instead of tearing him to pieces, showed him the greatest friendliness. Nor was the fox angry with him for having forgot his last warning. He only said that sons who could so forget their old father and disgrace their royal birth as those had done would not hesitate to betray their brother either. Then he took the prince up out of the lion's den and gave him directions what to do now so as to come by his rights again. The prince thanked the fox with all his heart for his true friendship. But the fox answered that if he had been of any use to him, he would now, for his own part, ask a service of him. The prince replied that he would do him any service that was in his power. "I have only one thing to ask of you," said the fox, "and that is that you should cut off my head with your sword." The prince was astonished, and said that he could not bring himself to cut the hand off his truest friend. And to this he stuck in spite of all the fox's declarations that it was the greatest service he could do him. At this the fox became very sorrowful, and declared that the prince's refusal to grant his request now compelled him to do a deed which he was very unwilling to do. If the prince would not cut off his head, then he must kill the prince himself. Then at last the prince drew his good sword and cut off the fox's head, and the next moment a youth stood before him. "Thanks," said he, "for this service, which has freed me from a spell that not even death itself could loosen. I am the dead man who lay unburied in the robber's inn, where you ransomed me and gave me honorable burial, and therefore I have helped you in your journey." With this they parted, and the prince, disguising himself as a horseshoer, went up to his father's palace and offered his services there. The king's men told him that a horseshoer was indeed wanted at the palace, but he must be one who could lift up the feet of the horse with the golden shoes, and such a one they had not yet been able to find. The prince asked to see the horse, and as soon as he entered the stable, the steed began to neigh in a friendly fashion, and stood as quiet and still as a lamb, while the prince lifted up his hoofs, one after the other, and showed the king's men the famous golden shoes. After this, the king's men began to talk about the bird Grip, and how strange it was that he would not sing, however well he was attended to. The horseshoer then said that he knew the bird very well. He had seen it when it sat in its cage in another king's palace, and if it did not sing now, it must be because it did not have all that it wanted. He himself knew so much about the bird's ways that if he only got to see it, he could tell at once what it lacked. The king's men now took counsel whether they ought to take the stranger in before the king, for in his chamber sat the bird Grip, along with the weeping princess. It was decided to risk doing so, and the horseshoer was led into the king's chamber, where he had no sooner called the bird by its name than it began to sing and the princess to smile. Then the darkness cleared away from the king's eyes, and the more the bird sang, the more clearly did he see, till at last, in the strange horseshoer, he recognized his youngest son. Then the princess told the king how treacherously his eldest sons had acted, and he had them banished from his kingdom. But the youngest prince married the princess, and got the horse with the golden shoes and half the kingdom from his father, who kept for himself so long as he lived, the bird Grip, which now sang with all its heart to the king and all his court. The cat's elopement. Once upon a time there lived a cat of marvelous beauty, with a skin as soft and shining as silk, and wise green eyes that could see even in the dark. His name was Gon, and he belonged to a music teacher, who was so fond and proud of him that he would not have parted with him for anything in the world. Now, not far from the music master's house, there dwelt a lady who possessed a most lovely little pussy-cat called Coma. She was such a little dear altogether, and blinked her eyes so daintily, and ate her supper so tidily, and when she had finished, she licked her pink nose so delicately with her little tongue that her mistress was never tired of saying, "Coma, Coma, what should I do without you?" Well, it happened one day that these two, when out for an evening stroll, met under a cherry tree, and in one moment fell madly in love with each other. Gon had long felt that it was time for him to find a wife, for all the ladies in the neighborhood paid him so much attention that it made him quite shy. But he was not easy to please, and did not care about any of them. Now, before he had time to think, Cupid had entangled him in his net, and he was filled with love towards Coma. She fully returned his passion, but, like a woman, she saw the difficulties in the way, and consulted sadly with Gon as to the means of overcoming them. Gon entreated his master to set matters right by buying Coma, but her mistress would not part from her. Then the music master was asked to sell Gon to the lady, but he declined to listen to any such suggestion, so everything remained as before. At length the love of the couple grew to such a pitch that they determined to please themselves, and to seek their fortunes together. So one moonlight night they stole away and ventured out into an unknown world. All day long they marched bravely on through the sunshine till they had left their homes far behind them, and towards evening they found themselves in a large park. The wanderers by this time were very hot and tired, and the grass looked very soft and inviting, and the trees cast cool, deep shadows, when suddenly an ogre appeared in this paradise, in the shape of a big, big dog. He came springing towards them, showing all his teeth, and Coma shrieked and rushed up a cherry tree. Gon, however, stood his ground boldly, and prepared to give battle, for he felt that Coma's eyes were upon him, and that he must not run away. But, alas! His courage would have availed him nothing had his enemy once touched him, for he was large and powerful and very fierce. From her perch in the tree, Coma saw it all and screamed with all her might, hoping that someone would hear and come to help. Luckily, a servant of the princess to whom the park belonged was walking by, and he drove off the dog, and picking up the trembling Gon in his arms, carried him to his mistress. So poor little Coma was left alone, while Gon was borne away full of trouble, not in the least knowing what to do. Even the attention paid him by the princess, who was delighted with his beauty and pretty ways, did not console him. But there was no use in fighting against fate, and he could only wait and see what would turn up. The princess, Gon's new mistress, was so good and kind that everybody loved her, and she would have led a happy life had it not been for a serpent who had fallen in love with her, and was constantly annoying her by his presence. Her servants had orders to drive him away as often as he appeared, but as they were careless, and the serpent very sly, it sometimes happened that he was able to slip past them and to frighten the princess by appearing before her. One day she was seated in her room, playing on her favorite musical instrument, when she felt something gliding up her sash and saw her enemy making his way to kiss her cheek. She shrieked and threw herself backwards, and Gon, who had been curled up on a stool at her feet, understood her terror, and with one bound seized the snake by his neck. He gave him one bite and one shake and flung him on the ground, where he lay, never to worry the princess any more. Then she took Gon in her arms, and praised and caressed him, and saw that he had the nicest bits to eat, and the softest mats to lie on, and he would have had nothing in the world to wish for if only he could have seen Coma again. Time passed on, and one morning Gon lay before the house door, basking in the sun. He looked lazily at the world stretched out before him, and saw in the distance a big ruffian of a cat teasing and ill-treating quite a little one. He jumped up full of rage, and chased away the big cat, and then he turned to comfort the little one, when his heart nearly burst with joy to find that it was Coma. At first Coma did not know him again. He had grown so large and stately, but when it dawned upon her who it was, her happiness knew no bounds, and they rubbed their heads and their noses again and again, while their purring might have been heard a mile off. Paw in paw, they appeared before the princess and told her the story of their life and its sorrows. The princess wept for sympathy and promised that they should never more be parted, but should live with her to the end of their days. By and by, the princess herself got married, and brought a prince to dwell in the palace in the park. And she told him all about her two cats, and how brave Gon had been, and how he had delivered her from her enemy, the serpent. And when the prince heard, he swore they should never leave them, but should go with the princess wherever she went. So it all fell out as the princess wished, and Gon and Coma had many children, and so had the princess, and they all played together, and were friends to the end of their lives. The Cunning Shoemaker. Once upon a time there lived a shoemaker who could get no work to do, and was so poor that he and his wife nearly died of hunger. At last he said to her, "It is no use waiting on here. I can find nothing, so I shall go down to Mascalucia, and perhaps there I shall be more lucky." So down he went to Mascalucia and walked through the streets crying, "Who wants some shoes?" And very soon a window was pushed up, and a woman's head was thrust out of it. "Here are a pair for you to patch," she said. And he sat down on her doorstep and set about patching them. "How much do I owe you?" she asked when they were done. "A shilling. Here is 18 pence, and good luck to you." And he went his way. He turned into the next street and set up his cry again, and it was not long before another window was pushed up and another head appeared. "Here are some shoes for you to patch." And the shoemaker sat down on the doorstep and patched them. "How much do I owe you?" asked the woman when the shoes were finished. "A florin. Here is a crown piece, and good luck to you." And she shut the window. "Well," thought the shoemaker, "I have done finely. But I will not go back to my wife just yet, as, if I only go on at this rate, I shall soon have enough money to buy a donkey." Having made up his mind what was best to do, he stayed in the town a few days longer, till he had 4 gold pieces safe in his purse. Then he went to the market, and for 2 of them he bought a good strong donkey, and, mounting on its back, he rode home to Catania. But as he entered a thick wood, he saw in the distance a band of robbers who were coming quickly towards him. "I am lost," thought he. "They are sure to take from me all the money that I have earned, and I shall be as poor as ever I was. What can I do?" However, being a clever little man and full of spirit, he did not lose heart, but, taking 5 florins, he fastened them out of sight under the donkey's thick mane. Then he rode on. Directly the robber came up to him, they seized him exactly as he had foretold, and took away all his money. "Oh, dear friends," he cried, wringing his hands, "I am only a poor shoemaker, and have nothing but this donkey left in the world." As he spoke, the donkey gave himself a shake, and down fell the 5 florins. "Where did that come from?" asked the robbers. "Ah," replied the shoemaker, "you have guessed my secret. The donkey is a golden donkey, and supplies me with all my money." "Sell him to us," said the robbers. "We will give you any price you like." The shoemaker at first declared that nothing would induce him to sell him, but at last he agreed to hand him over to the robbers for 50 gold pieces. "But listen to what I tell you," said he. "You must each take it in turn to own him for a night and a day, or else you will all be fighting over the money." With these words they parted, the robbers driving the donkey to their cave in the forest, and the shoemaker returning home, very pleased with the success of his trick. He just stopped on the way to pick up a good dinner, and the next day spent most of his gains in buying a small vineyard. Meanwhile, the robbers had arrived at the cave where they lived, and the captain, calling them all round him, announced that it as his right to have the donkey for the first night. His companions agreed, and then he told his wife to put a mattress in the stable. She asked if he had gone out of his mind, but he answered crossly, "What is that to you? Do as you are bid, and tomorrow I will bring you some treasures." Very early the captain awoke and searched the stable, but could find nothing, and guessed that Master Joseph had been making fun of them. "Well," he said to himself, "if I had been taken in, the others shall not come off any better." So, when one of his men arrived and asked him eagerly how much money he had got, he answered gaily, "Oh, comrade, if you only knew! But I shall say nothing about it till everyone has had his turn." One after another they all took the donkey, but no money was forthcoming for anybody. At length, when all the band had been tricked, they held a council, and resolved to march to the shoemaker's house and punish him well for his cunning. Just as before, the shoemaker saw them a long way off, and began to think how he could outwit them again. When he had hit upon a plan, he called his wife, and said to her, "Take a bladder, and fill it with blood, and bind it round your neck. When the robbers come and demand the money they gave me for the donkey, I shall shout to you, and tell you to get it quickly. You must argue with me, and decline to obey me, and then I shall plunge my knife into the bladder, and you must fall to the ground as if you were dead. There you must lie till I play on my guitar, then get up and begin to dance." The wife made haste to do as she was bid, and there was no time to lose, for the robbers were drawing very near the house. They entered with a great noise, and overwhelmed the shoemaker with reproaches for having deceived them about the donkey. "The poor beast must have lost its power, owing to the change of masters," said he, "but we will not quarrel about it. You shall have back the 50 gold pieces that you gave for him." "Aye, he cried to his wife, Go quickly to the chest upstairs, and bring down the money for these gentlemen." "Wait a little," answered she. "I must first bake this fish. It will be spoilt if I leave it now." "Go this instant." "As you are bid," shouted the shoemaker, stamping as if he was in a great passion. But as she did not stir, he drew his knife and stabbed her in the neck. The blood spurted out freely, and she fell to the ground as if she was dead. "What have you done?" asked the robbers, looking at him in dismay. The poor woman was doing nothing. "Perhaps I was hasty, but it is easily set right," replied the shoemaker, taking down his guitar and beginning to play. Hardly had he struck the first notes than his wife sat up, then got on her feet and danced. The robbers stared with open mouths, and at last they said, "Master Joseph, you may keep the 50 gold pieces, but tell us what you will take for your guitar, for you must sell it to us." "Oh, that is impossible," replied the shoemaker. "For every time I have a quarrel with my wife, I just strike her dead, and so give vent to my anger. This has become such a habit with me that I don't think I could break myself of it. And, of course, if I got rid of the guitar, I could never bring her back to life again." However, the robbers would not listen to him, and at last he consented to take 40 gold pieces for the guitar. Then they all returned to their cave in the forest, delighted with their new purchase, and longing for a chance of trying its powers. But the captain declared that the first trial belonged to him, and after that the others might have their turn. That evening he called to his wife and said, "What have you got for supper?" "Macaroni," answered she. "Why have you not boiled a fish?" he cried, and stab her in the neck so that she fell dead. The captain, who was not in the least angry, seized the guitar and began to play, but let him play as loud as he would, the dead woman never stirred. "Oh, lying shoemaker! Oh, abominable knave! Twice has he got the better of me. But I will pay him out." So he raged and swore, but it did him no good. The fact remained that he had killed his wife and could not bring her back again. The next morning came one of the robbers to fetch the guitar and to hear what had happened. "Well, how have you got on?" "Oh, splendidly! I stabbed my wife and then began to play, and now she is as well as ever."
"Did you really?"
"Then this evening I will try for myself." Of course the same thing happened over again, till all the wives had been killed secretly, and when there were no more left, they whispered to each other the dreadful tale and swore to be avenged on the shoemaker. The band lost no time in setting out for his house, and, as before, the shoemaker saw them coming from afar. He called to his wife, who was washing in the kitchen, "Listen, Aita, when the robbers come and ask for me, say I have gone to the vineyard. Then tell the dog to call me, and chase him from the house." When he had given these directions, he ran out of the back door and hid behind a barrel. A few minutes later, the robbers arrived and called loudly for the shoemaker. "Alas, good gentleman, he is up in the vineyard, but I will send the dog after him at once." "Here, now quickly to the vineyard, and tell your master some gentlemen are here who wish to speak to him. Go as fast as you can." And she opened the door and let the dog out. "You can really trust the dog to call your husband?" asked the robbers. "Dear me, yes. He understands everything, and will always carry any message I give him." By and by, the shoemaker came in and said, "Good morning, gentlemen. The dog tells me you wish to speak to me." "Yes, we do," replied the robber. "We have come to speak to you about that guitar. It is your fault that we have murdered all our wives, and, though we played as you told us, none of them ever came back to life." "You could not have played properly," said the shoemaker. "It was your own fault." "Well, we will forget all about it," answered the robbers, "if you will only sell us your dog." "Oh, that is impossible. I should never get on without him." But the robbers offered him 40 gold pieces, and at last he agreed to let them have the dog. So they departed, taking the dog with them, and when they got back to their cave, the captain declared that it was his right to have the first trial. He then called his daughter and said to her, "I am going to the inn. If anybody wants me, loose the dog and send him to call me." About an hour after someone arrived on business, and the girl untied the dog and said, "Go to the inn and call my father." The dog bounded off, but ran straight to the shoemaker. When the robber got home and found no dog, he thought he must have gone back to his old master, and, though night had already fallen, he went off after him. "Master Joseph, is the dog here?" asked he. "Ah, yes, the poor beast is so fond of me. You must give him time to get accustomed to new ways." So the captain brought the dog back, and the following morning handed him over to another of the band, just saying that the animal really could do what the shoemaker had said. The second robber carefully kept his own counsel, and fetched the dog secretly back from the shoemaker, and so on through the whole band. At length, when everybody had suffered, they met and told the whole story, and next day they all marched off in fury to the man who had made game of them. After reproaching him with having deceived them, they tied him up in a sack and told him they were going to throw him into the sea. The shoemaker lay quite still and let them do as they would. They went on till they came to a church, and the robbers said, "The sun is hot and the sack is heavy. Let us leave it here and go in and rest." So they put the sack down by the roadside and went into the church. Now, on a hill nearby, there was a swineherd looking after a great herd of pigs and whistling merrily. When Master Joseph heard him, he cried out as loud as he could, I won't, I say." "What won't you do?" asked the swineherd. "Oh," replied the shoemaker, "they want me to marry the king's daughter, and I won't do it." "How lucky you are," sighed the swineherd. "Now, if it were only me." "Oh, if that's all," replied the cunning shoemaker, "get you into this sack and let me out." Then the swineherd opened the sack and took the place of the shoemaker, who went gaily off, driving the pigs before him. When the robbers were rested, they came out of the church, took up the sack, and carried it to the sea, where they threw it in, and it sank directly. As they came back, they met the shoemaker and stared at him with open mouths. "Oh, if you only knew how many pigs live in the sea," he cried, "and the deeper you go, the more there are. I have just brought up these and mean to return for some more. There are still some left there." "Oh, more than I could count," replied the shoemaker. "I will show you what you must do." Then he led the robbers back to the shore. "Now," said he, "you must each of you tie a stone to your necks so that you may be sure to go deep enough, for I found the pigs that you saw very deep down indeed." Then the robbers all tied stones round their necks and jumped in and were drowned, and Master Joseph drove his pigs home and was a rich man to the end of his days. The fir tree. There was once a pretty little fir tree in a wood. It was in a capital position, for it could get sun, and there was enough air, and all around grew many tall companions, both pines and firs. It did not heed the warm sun and the fresh air, or notice the little peasant children who ran about chattering when they came out to gather wild strawberries and raspberries. Often they found a whole basketful and strung strawberries on a straw. They would sit down by the little fir tree and say, "What a pretty little one this is." The tree did not like that at all. By the next year it had grown a whole ring taller, and the year after that another ring more, for you can always tell a fir tree's age from its rings. "Oh, if I were only a great tree like the others," sighed the little fir tree, "then I could stretch out my branches far and wide and look out into the great world. The birds would build their nests in my branches, and when the wind blew, I would bow to it politely, just like the others." It took no pleasure in the sunshine, nor in the birds, nor in the rose-coloured clouds that sailed over it at dawn and at sunset. Then the winter came, and the snow lay white and sparkling all around, and a hare would come and spring right over the little fir tree, which annoyed it very much. But when 2 more winters had passed, the fir tree was so tall that the hare had to run round it. Ah, to grow and become great and old. That is the only pleasure in life, thought the tree. In the autumn, the woodcutters used to come and hew some of the tallest trees. This happened every year, and the young fir tree would shiver as the magnificent trees fell crashing and crackling to the ground, their branches hewn off, and the great trunks left bare, so that they were almost unrecognizable. But then they were laid on wagons and dragged out of the wood by horses. Where are they going? What will happen to them? In spring, when the swallows and storks came, the fir tree asked them, "Do you know where they were taken? Have you met them?" The swallows knew nothing of them, but the stork nodded his head thoughtfully, saying, "I think I know. I met many new ships as I flew from Egypt. There were splendid masts on the ships. I'll wager those were they. They had the scent of fir trees. Ah, those are grand, grand. Oh, if I were only big enough to sail away over the sea too. What sort of thing is the sea? What does it look like?" "Oh, it would take much too long to tell you all that," said the stork, and off he went. "Rejoice in your youth," said the sunbeams. "Rejoice in the sweet growing time, in the young life within you." And the wind kissed it, and the dew wept tears over it, but the fir tree did not understand. Towards Christmas time quite little trees were cut down, some not as big as the young fir tree, or just the same age, and now it had no peace or rest for longing to be away. These little trees, which were chosen for their beauty, kept all their branches. They were put in carts and drawn out of the wood by horses. "Whither are those going?" asked the fir tree. "They are no bigger than I." "And one there was much smaller even. Why do they keep their branches? Where are they taken to?" We know, twittered the sparrows. "Down there in the city we have peeped in at the windows. We know where they go. They attain to the greatest splendor and magnificence you can imagine. We have looked in at the windows and seen them planted in the middle of the warm room and adorned with the most beautiful things. Golden apples, sweetmeats, toys and hundreds of candles." "And then?" asked the fir tree, trembling in every limb with eagerness. "And then? What happens then?" "Oh, we haven't seen anything more than that. That was simply matchless." "Am I too destined to the same brilliant career?" wondered the fir tree excitedly. "That is even better than sailing over the sea. I am sick with longing. If it were only Christmas. Now I am tall and grown up like those which were taken away last year. Ah, if I were only in the cart. If I were only in the warm room with all the splendor and magnificence. And then? Then comes something better, something still more beautiful, else why should they dress us up? There must be something greater, something grander to come. But what? Oh, I am pining away. I really don't know what's the matter with me." "Rejoice in us," said the air and sunshine. "Rejoice in your fresh youth, in the free air." But it took no notice, and just grew and grew. There it stood fresh and green in winter and summer, and all who saw it said, What a beautiful tree! And at Christmas time it was the first to be cut down. The axe went deep into the pith. The tree fell to the ground with a groan. It felt bruised and faint. It could not think of happiness. It was sad at leaving its home. The spot where it had sprung up, it knew, too, that it would never see again its dear old companions, or the little shrubs and flowers, perhaps not even the birds. Altogether the parting was not pleasant. When the tree came to itself again, it was packed in a yard with other trees, and a man was saying, "This is a splendid one. We shall only want this." Then came 2 footmen in livery and carried the fir tree to a large and beautiful room. There were pictures hanging on the walls, and near the Dutch stove stood great Chinese vases with lions on their lids. There were armchairs, silk-covered sofas, big tables laden with picture books and toys, worth hundreds of pounds at least. "So," the children said, "the fir tree was placed in a great tub filled with sand, but no one could see that it was a tub, for it was all hung with greenery and stood on a gay carpet." How the tree trembled! What was coming now? On its branches they hung little nets cut out of coloured paper, each full of sugar plums. Gilt apples and nuts hung down as if they were growing. Over 100 red, blue, and white tapers were fastened among the branches, dolls as lifelike as human beings. The fir tree had never seen any before, was suspended among the green, and right up at the top was fixed a gold tinsel star. It was gorgeous, quite unusually gorgeous. "Tonight," they all said, "tonight it will be lighted." Ah, thought the tree, if it were only evening. Then the tapers would soon be lighted. What will happen then? I wonder whether the trees will come from the wood to see me, or if the sparrows will fly against the window panes. Am I to stand here decked out thus through winter and summer? It was not a bad guess, but the fir tree had real barkache from sheer longing, and barkache in trees is just as bad as headache in human beings. Now the tapers were lighted. What a glitter! What splendour! The tree quivered in all its branches so much that one of the candles caught the green and singed it. "Take care!" cried the young ladies, and they extinguished it. Now the tree did not even dare to quiver. It was really terrible. It was so afraid of losing any of its ornaments, and it was quite bewildered by all the radiance. And then the folding doors were opened, and a crowd of children rushed in, as though they wanted to knock down the whole tree, whilst the older people followed soberly. The children stood quite silent, but only for a moment, and then they shouted again and danced round the tree and snatched off one present after another. "What are they doing?" thought the tree. "What is going to happen?" And the tapers burnt low on the branches and were put out one by one. And then the children were given permission to plunder the tree. They rushed at it so that all its boughs creaked. If it had not been fastened by the gold star at the top to the ceiling, it would have been overthrown. The children danced about with their splendid toys, and no one looked at the tree, except the old nurse, who came and peeped amongst the boughs, just to see if a fig or an apple had been forgotten. "A story! A story!" cried the children, and dragged a little stout man to the tree. He sat down beneath it, saying, "Here we are in the greenwood, and the tree will be delighted to listen. But I am only going to tell one story. Shall it be Henny Penny or Humpty Dumpty who fell downstairs, and yet gained great honour and married a princess?" "Henny Penny!" cried some. "Humpty Dumpty!" cried others. There was a perfect babel of voices. Only the fir tree kept silent and thought, "Am I not to be in it? Am I to have nothing to do with it?" But it had already been in it and played out its part. And the man told them about Humpty Dumpty who fell downstairs and married a princess. The children clapped their hands and cried, "Another! Another!" They wanted the story of Henny Penny also, but they only got Humpty Dumpty. The fir tree stood quite astonished and thoughtful. The birds in the wood had never related anything like that. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs and yet married a princess. Yes, that is the way of the world, thought the tree, and was sure it must be true, because such a nice man had told the story. Well, who knows? Perhaps I shall fall downstairs and marry a princess. And it rejoiced to think that next day it would be decked out again with candles, toys, glittering ornaments, and fruits. Tomorrow I shall quiver again with excitement. I shall enjoy to the full all my splendor. Tomorrow I shall hear Humpty Dumpty again, and perhaps Henny Penny too. And the tree stood silent and lost in thought all through the night. Next morning the servants came in. Now the dressing up will begin again, thought the tree. But they dragged it out of the room and up the stairs to the lumber room and put it in a dark corner where no ray of light could penetrate. What does this mean? Thought the tree. What am I to do here? What is there for me to hear? And it leant against the wall and thought, and there was time enough for that, for days and nights went by, and no one came. At last, when someone did come, it was only to put some great boxes into the corner. Now the tree was quite covered. It seemed as if it had been quite forgotten. Now it is winter outdoors, thought the fir tree. The ground is hard and covered with snow. They can't plant me yet. And that is why I am staying here under cover till the spring comes. How thoughtful they are! Only I wish it were not so terribly dark and lonely here, not even a little hare. It was so nice out in the wood, when the snow lay all around, and the hare leapt past me, yes, even when he leapt over me, but I didn't like it then. It's so dreadfully lonely up here. Squeak, squeak, said a little mouse, stealing out, followed by a second. They sniffed at the fir tree, and then crept between its boughs. It's frightfully cold, said the little mice. How nice it is to be here. Don't you think so too, you old fir tree? I'm not at all old, said the tree. There are many much older than I am. Where do you come from? Asked the mice. And what do you know? They were extremely inquisitive. Do tell us about the most beautiful place in the world. Is that where you come from? Have you been in the storeroom, where cheeses lie on the shelves, and hams hang from the ceiling, where one dances on tallow candles, and where one goes in thin and comes out fat? I know nothing about that, said the tree, but I know the wood, where the sun shines and the birds sing. And then it told them all about its young days, and the little mice had never heard anything like that before, and they listened with all their ears, and said, Oh, how much you have seen! How lucky you have been! Aye, said the fir tree, and then it thought over what it had told them. Yes, on the whole, those were very happy times. But then it went on to tell them about Christmas Eve, when it had been adorned with sweetmeats and tapers. Oh, said the little mice, how lucky you have been, you old fir tree. I'm not at all old, said the tree. I only came from the wood this winter. I am only a little backward, perhaps, in my growth. How beautifully you tell stories, said the little mice. And next evening they came with 4 others, who wanted to hear the tree's story, and it told still more, for it remembered everything so clearly and thought, those were happy times. But they may come again. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet he married a princess. Perhaps I shall also marry a princess. And then it thought of a pretty little birch tree that grew out in the wood, and seemed to the fir tree a real princess, and a very beautiful one too. Who is Humpty Dumpty? Asked the little mice. And then the tree told the whole story. It could remember every single word, and the little mice were ready to leap onto the topmost branch out of sheer joy. Next night many more mice came, and on Sunday even 2 rats, but they did not care about the story, and that troubled the little mice, for now they thought less of it too. "Is that the only story you know?" asked the rats. "The only one," answered the tree. "I heard that on my happiest evening, but I did not realize then how happy I was. That's a very poor story. Don't you know one about bacon or tallow candles, a storeroom story?" "No," said the tree. "Then we are much obliged to you," said the rats, and they went back to their friends. At last the little mice went off also, and the tree said, sighing, "Really it was very pleasant when the lively little mice sat round and listened whilst I told them stories. But now that's over too. But now I will think of the time when I shall be brought out again to keep up my spirits." But when did that happen? Well, it was one morning when they came to tidy up the lumber room. They threw it really rather roughly on the floor, but a servant dragged it off at once downstairs, where there was daylight once more. Now life begins again, thought the tree. It felt the fresh air, the first rays of the sun, and there it was out in the yard. Everything passed so quickly, the tree quite forgot to notice itself. There was so much to look at all around. The yard opened on a garden full of flowers. The roses were so fresh and sweet, hanging over a little trellis. The lime trees were in blossom, and the swallows flew about, saying, "Quire, vire, veal." My husband has come home, but it was not the fir tree they meant. "Now I shall live," thought the tree joyfully, stretching out its branches wide. But alas! They were all withered and yellow, and it was lying in a corner among weeds and nettles. The golden star was still on its highest bough, and it glittered in the bright sunlight. In the yard some of the merry children were playing, who had danced so gaily round the tree at Christmas. One of the little ones ran up and tore off the gold star. "Look what was left on the ugly old fir tree," he cried, and stamped on the boughs so that they cracked under his feet. And the tree looked at all the splendor and freshness of the flowers in the garden, and then looked at itself and wished that it had been left lying in the dark corner of the lumber room. It thought of its fresh youth in the wood, of the merry Christmas Eve, and of the little mice who had listened so happily to the story of Humpty Dumpty. Too late, thought the old tree. If only I had enjoyed myself whilst I could. Now all is over and gone. And a servant came and cut the tree into small pieces. There was quite a bundle of them. They flickered brightly under the great copper in the brewhouse. The tree sighed deeply, and each sigh was like a pistol shot. So the children who were playing there ran up and sat in front of the fire, gazing at it and crying, "Pith, puff, bang." But for each report, which was really a sigh, the tree was thinking of a summer's day in the wood, or of a winter's night out there when the stars were shining. It thought of Christmas Eve and of Humpty Dumpty, which was the only story it had heard or could tell. And then the tree had burnt away. The children played on in the garden, and the youngest had the golden star on his breast, which the tree had worn on the happiest evening of its life. And now that was past, and the tree had passed away, and the story too, all ended and done with. And that's the way with all stories. The flying trunk. There was once a merchant who was so rich that he could have paved the whole street, and perhaps even a little side street besides, with silver. But he did not do that. He knew another way of spending his money. If he spent a shilling, he got back a florin. Such an excellent merchant he was till he died. Now his son inherited all this money. He lived very merrily. He went every night to the theatre, made paper kites out of 5-pound notes, and played ducks and drakes with sovereigns instead of stones. In this way the money was likely to come soon to an end. And so it did. At last he had nothing left but 4 shillings, and he had no clothes except a pair of slippers and an old dressing gown. His friends did not trouble themselves any more about him. They would not even walk down the street with him. But one of them, who was rather good-natured, sent him an old trunk with the message, "Pack up." That was all very well, but he had nothing to pack up, so he got into the trunk himself. It was an enchanted trunk, for as soon as the lock was pressed, it could fly. He pressed it, and away he flew, in it up the chimney, high into the clouds, further and further away. But whenever the bottom gave a little creak, he was in terror lest the trunk should go to pieces, for then he would have turned a dreadful somersault. Just think of it. In this way he arrived at the land of the Turks. He hid the trunk in a wood under some dry leaves, and then walked into the town. He could do that quite well, for all the Turks were dressed just as he was, in a dressing gown and slippers. He met a nurse with a little child. "Halloa! You Turkish nurse," said he, "what is that great castle there close to the town? The one with the windows so high up?" "The Sultan's daughter lives there," she replied. "It is prophesied that she will be very unlucky in her husband, and so no one is allowed to see her except when the Sultan and Sultana are by." "Thank you," said the merchant's son, and he went into the wood, sat himself in his trunk, flew on to the roof, and crept through the window into the princess's room. She was lying on the sofa asleep, and was so beautiful that the young merchant had to kiss her. Then she woke up and was very much frightened, but he said he was a Turkish god who had come through the air to see her, and that pleased her very much. They sat close to each other, and he told her a story about her eyes. They were beautiful dark lakes in which her thoughts swam about like mermaids, and her forehead was a snowy mountain, grand and shining. These were lovely stories. Then he asked the princess to marry him, and she said yes at once. "But you must come here on Saturday," she said, "for then the Sultan and the Sultana are coming to tea with me. They will be indeed proud that I receive the god of the Turks. But mind you have a really good story ready, for my parents like them immensely. My mother likes something rather moral and high-flown, and my father likes something merry to make him laugh." "Yes, I shall only bring a fairy story for my dowry," said he, and so they parted. But the princess gave him a sabre set with gold pieces which he could use. Then he flew away, bought himself a new dressing gown, and sat down in the wood and began to make up a story, for it had to be ready by Saturday, and that was no easy matter. When he had it ready, it was Saturday. The Sultan, the Sultana, and the whole court were at tea with the princess. He was most graciously received. "Will you tell us a story?" said the Sultana, "one that is thoughtful and instructive." "But something that we can laugh at," said the Sultan. "Oh, certainly," he replied, and began, "Now, listen attentively. There was once a box of matches which lay between a tinder box and an old iron pot, and they told the story of their youth. We used to be on the green fir boughs. Every morning and evening we had diamond tea, which was the dew, and the whole day long we had sunshine, and the little birds used to tell us stories. We were very rich, because the other trees only dressed in summer, but we had green dresses in summer and in winter. Then the woodcutter came, and our family was split up. We have now the task of making light for the lowest people. That is why we grand people are in the kitchen." "My fate was quite different," said the iron pot near which the matches lay. "Since I came into the world, I have been many times scoured and have cooked much. My only pleasure is to have a good chat with my companions when I am lying nice and clean in my place after dinner." "Now you are talking too fast," spluttered the fire. "Yes, let us decide who is the grandest," said the matches. "No, I don't like talking about myself," said the pot. "Let us arrange an evening's entertainment. I will tell the story of my life on the Baltic by the Danish shore, "What a beautiful beginning," said all the plates. "That's a story that will please us all." And the end was just as good as the beginning. All the plates clattered for joy. "Now I will dance," said the tongs, and she danced. Oh, how high she could kick! The old chair cover in the corner split when he saw her. The urn would have sung, but she said she had a cold. She could not sing unless she boiled. In the window was an old quill pen. There was nothing remarkable about her except that she had been dipped too deeply into the ink. But she was very proud of that. "If the urn will not sing," said she, "outside the door hangs a nightingale in a cage who will sing." "I don't think it's proper," said the kettle, "that such a foreign bird should be heard." "Oh, let us have some acting," said everyone. "Do let us." Suddenly the door opened and the maid came in. Everyone was quite quiet. There was not a sound, but each pot knew what he might have done and how grand he was. The maid took the matches and lit the fire with them. How they spluttered and flamed, to be sure! "Now everyone can see," they thought, "that we are the grandest. How we sparkle! What a light!" But here they were burnt out. "That was a delightful story," said the sultana. "I quite feel myself in the kitchen with the matches." "Yes, now you shall marry our daughter." "Yes, indeed," said the sultan, "you shall marry our daughter on Monday." And they treated the young man as one of the family. The wedding was arranged, and the night before the whole town was illuminated. Biscuits and gingerbreads were thrown among the people. The street boys stood on tiptoe crying hurrahs and whistling through their fingers. It was all splendid. "Now I must also give them a treat," thought the merchant's son. And so he bought rockets, crackers, and all the kinds of fireworks you can think of, put them in his trunk, and flew up with them into the air. Whirr! How they fizzed and blazed! All the Turks jumped so high that their slippers flew above their heads. Such a splendid glitter they had never seen before. Now they could quite well understand that it was the god of the Turks himself who was to marry the princess. As soon as the young merchant came down again into the wood with his trunk, he thought, "Now I will just go into the town to see how the show has taken." And it was quite natural that he should want to do this. Oh, what stories the people had to tell! Each one whom he asked had seen it differently, but they had all found it beautiful. "I saw the Turkish god himself," said one. "He had eyes like glittering stars and a beard like foaming water." "He flew away in a cloak of fire," said another. They were splendid things that he heard, and the next day was to be his wedding day. Then he went back into the wood to sit in his trunk, but what had become of it? The trunk had been burnt. A spark of the fireworks had set it alight, and the trunk was in ashes. He could no longer fly, and could never reach his bride. She stood the whole day long on the roof and waited. Perhaps she is waiting there still. But he wandered through the world and told stories, though they are not so merry as the one he told about the matches, the goblin and the grocer. There was once a hard-working student who lived in an attic, and he had nothing in the world of his own. There was also a hard-working grocer who lived on the first floor, and he had the whole house for his own. The goblin belonged to him. For every Christmas Eve there was waiting for him at the grocer's a dish of jam with a large lump of butter in the middle. The grocer could afford this, so the goblin stayed in the grocer's shop, and this teaches us a good deal. One evening the student came in by the back door to buy a candle and some cheese. He had no one to send, so he came himself. He got what he wanted, paid for it, and nodded. A good evening to the grocer and his wife. She was a woman who could do more than nod. She could talk. When the student had said good night, he suddenly stood still, reading the sheet of paper in which the cheese had been wrapped. It was a leaf torn out of an old book, a book of poetry. "There's more of that over there," said the grocer. "I gave an old woman some coffee for the book. If you like to give me 2 pence, you can have the rest." "Yes," said the student, "give me the book instead of the cheese. I can eat my bread without cheese." "It would be a shame to leave the book to be torn up. You are a clever and practical man. But about poetry, you understand as much as that old tub over there." And that sounded rude as far as the tub was concerned, but the grocer laughed, and so did the student. It was only said in fun, but the goblin was angry that anyone should dare to say such a thing to a grocer who owned the house and sold the best butter. When it was night and the shop was shut, and everyone was in bed except the student, the goblin went upstairs and took the grocer's wife's tongue. She did not use it when she was asleep, and on whatever object in the room he put it, that thing began to speak, and spoke out its thoughts and feelings just as well as the lady to whom it belonged. But only one thing at a time could use it, and that was a good thing, or they would have all spoken together. The goblin laid the tongue on the tub in which were the old newspapers. "Is it true," he asked, "that you know nothing about poetry?" "Certainly not," answered the tub. "Poetry is something that is in the papers and that is frequently cut out. I have a great deal more in me than the student has, and yet I am only a small tub in the grocer's shop." And the goblin put the tongue on the coffee mill, and how it began to grind. He put it on the butter cask and on the till, and all were of the same opinion as the waste paper tub. And one must believe the majority. Now I will tell the student. And with these words he crept softly up the stairs to the attic where the student lived. There was a light burning, and the goblin peeped through the keyhole and saw that he was reading the torn book that he had bought in the shop. But how bright it was! Out of the book shot a streak of light which grew into a large tree and spread its branches far above the student. Every leaf was alive, and every flower was a beautiful girl's head, some with dark and shining eyes, others with wonderful blue ones. Every fruit was a glittering star, and there was a marvelous music in the student's room. The little goblin had never even dreamt of such a splendid sight, much less seen it. He stood on tiptoe, gazing and gazing, till the candle in the attic was put out. The student had blown it out and had gone to bed, but the goblin remained standing outside listening to the music, which very softly and sweetly was now singing the student a lullaby. "I have never seen anything like this," said the goblin. "I never expected this. I must stay with the student." The little fellow thought it over, for he was a sensible goblin. Then he sighed, "The student has no jam." And on that he went down to the grocer again. And it was a good thing that he did go back, for the tub had nearly worn out the tongue. It had read everything that was inside it, on the one side, and was just going to turn itself round and read from the other side when the goblin came in and returned the tongue to its owner. But the whole shop, from the till down to the shavings, from that night changed their opinion of the tub, and they looked up to it and had such faith in it that they were under the impression that when the grocer read the art and drama critiques out of the paper in the evenings, it all came from the tub. But the goblin could no longer sit quietly listening to the wisdom and intellect downstairs. No. As soon as the light shone in the evening from the attic, it seemed to him as though its beams were strong ropes dragging him up, and he had to go and peep through the keyhole. There he felt the sort of feeling we have looking at the great rolling sea in a storm, and he burst into tears. He could not himself say why he wept, but in spite of his tears he felt quite happy. How beautiful it must be to sit under that tree with the student, but that he could not do. He had to content himself with the keyhole and be happy there. There he stood out on the cold landing, the autumn wind blowing through the cracks of the floor. It was cold, very cold, But he first found it out when the light in the attic was put out and the music in the wood died away. Ah! Then it froze him, and he crept down again into his warm corner. There it was, comfortable and cozy. When Christmas came, and with it the jam with the large lump of butter, then the grocer was first with him. But in the middle of the night the goblin awoke, hearing a great noise and knocking against the shutters, people hammering from outside. The watchman was blowing his horn. A great fire had broken out. The whole town was in flames. Was it in the house, or was it at a neighbour's? Where was it? The alarm increased. The grocer's wife was so terrified that she took her gold earrings out of her ears and put them in her pocket in order to save something. The grocer seized his account books, and the maid her black silk dress. Everyone wanted to save his most valuable possession, so did the goblin. And in a few leaps he was up the stairs and in the student's room. He was standing quietly by the open window, looking at the fire that was burning in the neighbour's house just opposite. The goblin seized the book lying on the table, put it in his red cap, and clasped it with both hands. The best treasure in the house was saved, and he climbed out onto the roof with it, on to the chimney. There he sat, lighted up by the flames from the burning house opposite, both hands holding tightly on his red cap, in which lay the treasure. And now he knew what his heart really valued most, to whom he really belonged. But when the fire was put out, and the goblin thought it over, then, "I will divide myself between the two," he said. "I cannot quite give up the grocer, because of the jam. And it is just the same with us. We also cannot quite give up the grocer, because of the jam, the golden lion." There was once a rich merchant who had 3 sons, and when they were grown up, the eldest said to him, "Father, I wish to travel and see the world. I pray you let me." So the father ordered a beautiful ship to be fitted up, and the young man sailed away in it. After some weeks the vessel cast anchor before a large town, and the merchant's son went on shore. The first thing he saw was a large notice written on a board saying that if any man could find the king's daughter within 8 days, he should have her to wife, but that if he tried and failed, his head must be the forfeit. "Well," thought the youth as he read this proclamation, "that ought not to be a very difficult matter." And he asked an audience of the king, and told him that he wished to seek for the princess. "Certainly," replied the king. "You have the whole palace to search in, but remember, if you fail, it will cost you your head." So saying, he commanded the doors to be thrown open, and food and drink to be set before the young man, who, after he had eaten, began to look for the princess. But though he visited every corner and chest and cupboard, she was not in any of them, and after 8 days he gave it up, and his head was cut off. All this time his father and brothers had had no news of him, and were very anxious. At last the second son could bear it no longer, and said, "Dear father, give me, I pray you, a large ship and some money, and let me go and seek for my brother." So another ship was fitted out, and the young man sailed away, and was blown by the wind into the same harbour where his brother had landed. Now, when he saw the first ship lying at anchor, his heart beat high, and he said to himself, "My brother cannot surely be far off," and he ordered a boat and was put on shore. As he jumped onto the pier, his eye caught the notice about the princess, and he thought, "He has undertaken to find her, and has certainly lost his head. I must try myself, and seek him as well as her. It cannot be such a very difficult matter." But he fared no better than his brother, and in 8 days his head was cut off. So now there was only the youngest at home, and when the other 2 never came, He also begged for a ship that he might go in search of his lost brothers. And when the vessel started, a high wind arose and blew him straight to the harbour where the notice was set. "Aho!" said he as he read, "Whoever can find the king's daughter shall have her to wife. It is quite clear now what has befallen my brothers. But in spite of that, I think I must try my luck," and he took the road to the castle. On the way he met an old woman who stopped and begged. "Leave me in peace, old woman," replied he. "Oh, do not send me away empty," she said. "You are such a handsome young man, you will surely not refuse an old woman a few pence." "I tell you, old woman, leave me alone." "You are in some trouble?" she asked. "Tell me what it is, and perhaps I can help you." Then he told her how he had set his heart on finding the king's daughter. "I can easily manage that for you, as long as you have enough money." "Oh, as to that, I have plenty," answered he. "Well, you must take it to a goldsmith and get him to make it into a golden lion with eyes of crystal, and inside it must have something that will enable it to play tunes. When it is ready, bring it to me." The young man did as he was bid, and when the lion was made, the old woman hid the youth in it and brought it to the king, who was so delighted with it that he wanted to buy it. But she replied, "It does not belong to me, and my master will not part from it at any price." "At any rate, leave it with me for a few days," said he. "I should like to show it to my daughter." "Yes, I can do that," answered the old woman. "But tomorrow I must have it back again." And she went away. The king watched her till she was quite out of sight, so as to make sure that she was not spying upon him. Then he took the golden lion into his room and lifted some loose boards from the floor. Below the floor there was a staircase, which he went down till he reached a door at the foot. This he unlocked, and found himself in a narrow passage closed by another door, which he also opened. The young man, hidden in the golden lion, kept count of everything, and marked that there were in all 7 doors. After they had all been unlocked, the king entered a lovely hall, where the princess was amusing herself with 11 friends. All 12 girls wore the same clothes, and were as like each other as 2 peas. "What bad luck," thought the youth, "even supposing that I managed to find my way here again. I don't see how I could ever tell which was the princess." And he stared hard at the princess as she clapped her hands with joy and ran up to them crying, "Oh, do let us keep that delicious beast for tonight. It will make such a nice plaything." The king did not stay long, and when he left, he handed over the lion to the maidens, who amused themselves with it for some time, till they got sleepy, and thought it was time to go to bed. But the princess took the lion into her own room and laid it on the floor. She was just beginning to doze when she heard a voice quite close to her, which made her jump. "Oh, lovely princess, if you only knew what I have gone through to find you." The princess jumped out of bed screaming, "The lion! The lion!" But her friends thought it was a nightmare, and did not trouble themselves to get up. "Oh, lovely princess," continued the voice, "fear nothing. I am the son of a rich merchant, and desire above all things to have you for my wife. And in order to get to you, I have hidden myself in this golden lion." "What use is that?" she asked. "For if you cannot pick me out from among my companions, you will still lose your head." "I look to you to help me," he said. "I have done so much for you that you might do this one thing for me. Then listen to me. On the 8th day I will tie a white sash round my waist, and by that you will know me." The next morning the king came very early to fetch the lion, as the old woman was already at the palace asking for it. When they were safe from view, she led the young man out, and he returned to the king and told him that he wished to find the princess. "Very good," said the king, who by this time was almost tired of repeating the same words. "But if you fail, your head will be the forfeit." So the youth remained quietly in the castle, eating and looking at all the beautiful things around him, and every now and then pretending to be searching busily in all the closets and corners. On the 8th day he entered the room where the king was sitting. "Take up the floor in this place," he said. The king gave a cry, but stopped himself and asked, "What do you want the floor up for?" "There is nothing there." But as all his courtiers were watching him, he did not like to make any more objections, and ordered the floor to be taken up, as the young man desired. The youth then went straight down the staircase till he reached the door. Then he turned and demanded that the key should be brought. So the king was forced to unlock the door, and the next, and the next, and the next, till all 7 were open, and they entered into the hall where the 12 maidens were standing all in a row, so like that none might tell them apart. But as he looked, one of them silently drew a white sash from her pocket and slipped it round her waist, and the young man sprang to her and said, "This is the princess, and I claim her for my wife." And the king owned himself beaten and commanded that the wedding feast should be held. After 8 days the bridal pair said farewell to the king and set sail for the youth's own country, taking with them a whole shipload of treasures as the princess's dowry. But they did not forget the old woman who had brought about all their happiness, and they gave her enough money to make her comfortable to the end of her days. The House in the Wood. A poor woodcutter lived with his wife and 3 daughters in a little hut on the borders of a great forest. One morning as he was going to his work, he said to his wife, "Let our eldest daughter bring me my lunch into the wood, and so that she shall not lose her way, I will take a bag of millet with me, and sprinkle the seed on the path." When the sun had risen high over the forest, the girl set out with a basin of soup. But the field and wood sparrows, the larks and finches, blackbirds and green finches, had picked up the millet long ago, and the girl could not find her way. She went on and on, till the sun set and night came on. The trees rustled in the darkness, the owls hooted, and she began to be very much frightened. Then she saw in entire distance a light that twinkled between the trees. "There must be people living yonder," she thought. "Who will take me in for the night?" And she began walking towards it. Not long afterwards, she came to a house with lights in the windows. She knocked at the door, and a gruff voice called, "Come in!" The girl stepped into the dark entrance and tapped at the door of the room. "Just walk in," cried the voice. And when she opened the door, there sat an old, grey-haired man at the table. His face was resting on his hands, and his white beard flowed over the table almost down to the ground. By the stove lay 3 beasts, a hen, a cock, and a brindled cow. The girl told the old man her story and asked for a night's lodging. The man said, "Pretty cock, pretty hen, and you, pretty brindled cow, what do you say now?" "Dukes," answered the beasts, and that must have meant, "We are quite willing." For the old man went on, "Here is abundance. Go into the back kitchen and cook us a supper." The girl found plenty of everything in the kitchen and cooked a good meal, but she did not think of the beasts. She placed the full dishes on the table, sat down opposite the grey-haired man, and ate till her hunger was appeased. When she was satisfied, she said, "But now I am so tired. Where is a bed in which I can sleep?" The beasts answered, "You have eaten with him. You have drunk with him. Of us you have not thought. Sleep then as you ought." Then the old man said, "Go upstairs, and there you will find a bedroom. Shake the bed, and put clean sheets on, and go to sleep." The maiden went upstairs, and when she had made the bed, she lay down. After some time the grey-haired man came, looked at her by the light of his candle, and shook his head. And when he saw that she was sound asleep, he opened a trapdoor and let her fall into the cellar. The woodcutter came home late in the evening and reproached his wife for leaving him all day without food. "No, I did not," she answered. "The girl went off with your dinner. She must have lost her way, but will no doubt come back tomorrow." But at daybreak the woodcutter started off into the wood, and this time asked his second daughter to bring his food. "I will take a bag of lentils," said he. "They are larger than millet, and the girl will see them better and be sure to find her way." At midday the maiden took the food, but the lentils had all gone, as on the previous day the wood birds had eaten them all. The maiden wandered about the wood till nightfall, when she came in the same way to the old man's house and asked for food and a night's lodging. The man with the white hair again asked the beasts, "Pretty cock, pretty hen, and you, pretty brindled cow, what do you say now?" The beasts answered, "Jukes," and everything happened as on the former day. The girl cooked a good meal, ate and drank with the old man, and did not trouble herself about the animals. And when she asked for a bed, they replied, "You have eaten with him, you have drunk with him. Of us you have not thought. Now sleep as you ought." And when she was asleep, the old man shook his head over her and let her fall into the cellar. On the third morning the woodcutter said to his wife, "Send our youngest child today with my dinner. She is always good and obedient, and will keep to the right path, and not wander away like her sister's idle drones." But the mother said, "Must I lose my dearest child too?" "Do not fear," he answered. "She is too clever and intelligent to lose her way. I will take plenty of peas with me and strew them along. They are even larger than lentils, and will show her the way." But when the maiden started off with the basket on her arm, the wood pigeons had eaten up the peas, and she did not know which way to go. She was much distressed, and thought constantly of her poor hungry father and her anxious mother. At last, when it grew dark, she saw the little light, and came to the house in the wood. She asked prettily if she might stay there for the night, and the man with the white beard asked his beasts again, "Pretty cock, pretty hen, and you, pretty brindled cow, what do you say now?" "Dukes," they said. Then the maiden stepped up to the stove where the animals were lying, and stroked the cock and the hen, and scratched the brindled cow between its horns. And when at the bidding of the old man she had prepared a good supper, and the dishes were standing on the table, she said, "Shall I have plenty, while the good beasts have nothing? There is food to spare outside. I will attend to them first." Then she went out and fetched barley, and strewed it before the cock and hen, and brought the cow an armful of sweet-smelling hay. "Eat that, dear beasts," she said, "and when you are thirsty you shall have a good drink." Then she fetched a bowl of water, and the cock and hen flew onto the edge, put their beaks in, and then held up their heads as birds do when they drink, and the brindled cow also drank her fill. When the beasts were satisfied, the maiden sat down beside the old man at the table and ate what was left for her. Soon the cock and hen began to tuck their heads under their wings, and the brindled cow blinked its eyes. So the maiden said, "Shall we not go to rest now? Pretty cock, pretty hen, and you, pretty brindled cow, what do you say now?" The animals said, "Dukes, you have eaten with us, you have drunk with us, you have tended us right, so we wish you good night." The maiden therefore went upstairs, made the bed, and put on clean sheets, and fell asleep. She slept peacefully till midnight, when there was such a noise in the house that she awoke. Everything trembled and shook. The animals sprang up and dashed themselves in terror against the wall. The beams swayed as if they would be torn from their foundations. It seemed as if the stairs were tumbling down, and then the roof fell in with a crash. Then all became still, and as no harm came to the maiden, she lay down again and fell asleep. But when she awoke again in broad daylight, what a sight met her eyes! She was lying in a splendid room, furnished with royal splendor. The walls were covered with golden flowers on a green ground. The bed was of ivory and the counterpane of velvet, and on a stool nearby lay a pair of slippers studded with pearls. The maiden thought she must be dreaming, but in came 3 servants richly dressed, who asked what were her commands. "Go," said the maiden. "I will get up at once and cook the old man's supper for him, and then I will feed the pretty cock and hen and the brindled cow." But the door opened, and in came a handsome young man who said, "I am a king's son, and was condemned by a wicked witch to live as an old man in this wood with no company but that of my 3 servants, who were transformed into a cock, a hen, and a brindled cow. The spell could only be broken by the arrival of a maiden who should show herself kind not only to men but to beasts. You are that maiden. And last night at midnight we were freed, and this poor house was again transformed into my royal palace." As they stood there, the king's son told his 3 servants to go and fetch the maiden's parents to be present at the wedding feast. "But where are my 2 sisters?" asked the maid. "I shut them up in the cellar, but in the morning they shall be led forth into the forest, and shall serve a charcoal burner until they have improved, and will never again suffer poor animals to go hungry, the jackal, the dove, and the panther." There was once a dove who built a nice soft nest as a home for her 3 little ones. She was very proud of their beauty, and perhaps talked about them to her neighbors more than she need have done, till at last everybody for miles round knew where the 3 prettiest baby doves in the whole countryside were to be found. One day, a jackal who was prowling about in search of a dinner came by chance to the foot of the rock where the dove's nest was hidden away, and he suddenly bethought himself that if he could get nothing better, he might manage to make a mouthful of one of the young doves. So he shouted as loud as he could, "Oh, oh, mother dove!" And the dove replied, trembling with fear, "What do you want, sir?" "One of your children," said he, "and if you don't throw it to me, I will eat up you and the others as well. Now." The dove was nearly driven distracted at the jackal's words, but in order to save the lives of the other 2, she did at last throw the little one out of the nest. The jackal ate it up and went home to sleep. Meanwhile, the mother dove sat on the edge of her nest, crying bitterly, when a heron, who was flying slowly past the rock, was filled with pity for her, and stopped to ask, "What is the matter, you poor dove?" And the dove answered, "A jackal came by, and asked me to give him one of my little ones, and said that if I refused, he would jump on my nest and eat us all up." But the heron replied, "You should not have believed him. He could never have jumped so high. He only deceived you because he wanted something for supper." And with these words the heron flew off. He had hardly got out of sight when again the jackal came creeping slowly round the foot of the rock. And when he saw the dove, he cried out a second time, "Oh, oh, mother dove, give me one of your little ones, or I will jump on your nest and eat you all up." This time the dove knew better, and she answered boldly, "Indeed, I shall do nothing of the sort," though her heart beat wildly with fear when she saw the jackal preparing for a spring. However, he only cut himself against the rock, and thought he had better stick to threats, so he started again with his old cry, "Mother dove, be quick, and give me one of your little ones, or I will eat you all up." But the mother dove only answered as before, "Indeed, I shall do nothing of the sort, for I know we are safely out of your reach." The jackal felt it was quite hopeless to get what he wanted, and asked, "Tell me, Mother Dove, how have you suddenly become so wise?" "It was the heron who told me," replied she. "And which way did he go?" said the jackal. "Down there among the reeds." "You can see him if you look," said the dove. Then the jackal nodded goodbye and went quickly after the heron. He soon came up to the great bird, who was standing on a stone on the edge of the river, watching for a nice fat fish. "Tell me, heron," said he, "when the wind blows from that quarter, to which side do you turn?" "And which side do you turn to?" asked the heron. The jackal answered, "I always turn to this side." "Then that is the side I turn to," remarked the heron. "And when the rain comes from that quarter, which side do you turn to?" And the heron replied, "And which side do you turn to?" "Oh, I always turn to this side," said the jackal. "Then that is the side I turn to," said the heron. "And when the rain comes straight down, what do you do?" "What do you do yourself?" asked the heron. "I do this," answered the jackal. "I cover my head with my paws." "Then that is what I do," said the heron. "I cover my head with my wings." And as he spoke, he lifted his large wings and spread them completely over his head. With one bound, the jackal had seized him by the neck and began to shake him. "Oh, have pity, cried the heron. "I never did you any harm. You told the dove how to get the better of me, and I am going to eat you for it." "But if you will let me go," entreated the heron, "I will show you the place where the panther has her lair." "Then you had better be quick about it," said the jackal, holding tight onto the heron until he had pointed out the panther's den. "Now you may go, my friend, for there is plenty of food here for me." So the jackal came up to the panther and asked politely, "Panther, would you like me to look after your children while you are out hunting?" "I should be very much obliged," said the panther, "but be sure you take care of them. They always cry all the time that I am away." So saying, she trotted off, and the jackal marched into the cave, where he found 10 little panthers and instantly ate one up. By and by the panther returned from hunting and said to him, "Jackal, bring out my little ones for their supper." The jackal fetched them out one by one till he had brought out 9, and he took the last one and brought it out again, so the whole 10 seemed to be there, and the panther was quite satisfied. Next day she went again to the chase, and the jackal ate up another little panther, so now there were only 8. In the evening, when she came back, the panther said, "Jackal, bring out my little ones." And the jackal brought out first one and then another, and the last one he brought out 3 times, so that the whole 10 seemed to be there. The following day the same thing happened, and the next, and the next, and the next, till at length there was not even one left, and the rest of the day the jackal busied himself with digging a large hole at the back of the den. That night, when the panther returned from hunting, she said to him as usual, "Jackal, bring out my little ones." But the jackal replied, "Bring out your little ones indeed." "Why, you know as well as I do that you have eaten them all up." Of course the panther had not the least idea what the jackal meant by this, and only repeated, "Jackal, bring out my children." As she got no answer, she entered the cave, but found no jackal, for he had crawled through the hole he had made and escaped. And, what was worse, she did not find the little ones either. Now the panther was not going to let the jackal get off like that, and set off at a trot to catch him. The jackal, however, had got a good start, and he reached a place where a swarm of bees deposited their honey in the cleft of a rock. Then he stood still and waited till the panther came up to him. "Jackal, where are my little ones?" she asked. And the jackal answered, "They are up there. It is where I keep school." The panther looked about and then inquired, "But where? I see nothing of them." "Come a little this way," said the jackal, "and you will hear how beautifully they sing." So the panther drew near the cleft of the rock. "Don't you hear them?" said the jackal. "They are in there," and slipped away while the panther was listening to the song of the children. She was still standing in the same place when a baboon went by. "What are you doing there, panther?" "I am listening to my children singing. It is here that the jackal keeps his school." Then the baboon seized a stick and poked it in the cleft of the rock, exclaiming, "Well then, I should like to see your children." The bees flew out in a huge swarm and made furiously for the panther, whom they attacked on all sides, while the baboon soon climbed up out of the way, crying, as he perched himself on the branch of a tree, "I wish you joy of your children," while from afar the jackal's voice was heard exclaiming, "Sting her well. Don't let her go." The panther galloped away as if she was mad, and flung herself into the nearest lake. But every time she raised her head, the bees stung her afresh, so at last the poor beast was drowned altogether.